Hi, welcome to 20 Ideas using 20 fat quarters with GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and we're having a whole lot of fun with we started out with 20 fat quarters. We had a whole stack of 20 and we've cut them all up. We cut them all the same into different size patches. We labelled them, and there's a pattern in case anyone's interested, and more information on the website on GourmetQuilter.com under 20 fat quarter ideas. And so in the pattern in part 1 we had a diagram showing how to cut up the fat quarters. As I said, they were all cut the same, so we stacked them into several stacks and we cut them all, labelled them all, and we've been working our way through. So we have done already 17 of the 20 ideas, so we're on to idea number 18. So we've just got a little bit left to go. We've been using most of our pieces. So the last time when we did project number 17, we made this fun quilt with these fun little character birds on it. And so when we did that, we were putting triangles or chomping off triangles, and I suggested saving them because we might use them in a future project, and this is the project. We're going to use these larger triangles that we cut away from the birds. So if you've been making the projects, you've most likely got a whole little stack of those triangles or half square units. So this is what they look like when they're cut off. So we did 2 lines of stitching. We cut so we cut between the 2 lines of stitching, and what we ended up with is 20 of these, because there's 21 of each colour teamed up with the background. So what we're going to make this time is just a fun little drawstring bag. We've made a larger drawstring bag, but this was a kind of a little fun size one, and as you can see we're using these triangle units here. So what we're going to do is trim these all up, and I'm sure you've probably seen me do it before, but I'll do it again. So I've actually done a fair bit of the joining up, but just to make sure that you can see what we're doing. So I've pressed them open, I've pressed the seam to one side, and I'm just running the diagonal line of my ruler along that diagonal stitched line, and then I'm just trimming them to the size that we want, which is pretty much a nice trim from the square. You can't really go any bigger, so we just got to trim these little bits off to give nice straight edges, and so that it is just the right size. If we don't trim them, they would all be just slightly different, and as you can see, just slightly too large to work comfortably together with other measurements and things. So it's really that easy to trim them. I've already done this one here. And then when you've got these half square triangle units, as you can see, there's lots of different ways you could put them together. So this one here, we had the darker background than I've got here, and I just positioned them so that you ended up with this sort of diagonal stripe looking, although they're all half square units. And these ones I've just put together in a different way. It's pretty much into little pinwheels if you just had a little block of 4 of them, but when you put them together you get this kind of all over look. So I've already gone ahead and joined mine up so that you didn't have to watch me do all that. So when I joined them in pairs. I joined this one to this one, and then I pressed that seam open because we've got all these bulky seams that are going to meet here. And then when I joined the pairs together, I pressed those seams open as well. So we've got it sitting quite nice and flat there. And then we needed to cut out some fabric, so I'd made this one out of this fun red. The one we're doing this time is this nice dotty fabric. So we need to cut some pieces of fabric for the top on both sides, and then the one that goes between the 2 panels is one piece, and it just wraps around the base there. And then I thought it was kind of fun to make the whole thing out of the lining and everything. This is fully lined, this bag, so it would be reversible if you wanted it to be. And I've done the casings and everything out of one fabric because you can get all of those pieces out of one width strip of fabric. So I just thought that was kind of a good way to use some fabric all in one. You could make them different colours, you could have different colours everywhere you like, different casings, the lining could be different, or you could get them all the same like this. So I'm doing all the same again with this dotty fabric that I've got here. So I've already gone ahead and, as you can see, I've started that. This is going to be my lining. So this is the main piece of the bag. So I've already started here. We've got this not quite as wide as this piece up the top here. Then we've got the panel, that's the piece that goes between. So I now need to join that on there. So we're just making one long strip, and then I need to join the other top piece on at that end there, and then it will get folded here. And we also need to make the casings, and we've done this before, but that's okay. I'll go through it all over again just to make sure that you know what we're doing. So I've got these little casings that sit up above. I find that that's a nice way to do them. It means that everything can be tidy and stitched in. So to do that, we've got strips that we've just joined. Now again, they could be different colours, but I have just used the same fabric. So I've just joined the two strips at the two short ends, and I've turned them out the right way. And they just need, I feel that they work really well if we just top stitch them close to the end. So I've already done one of them here. So I've stitched that 1/4 inch in from each end, and then they get pressed in half. So I think I can probably go ahead and join these up, because it's just straightforward sewing to join these up, making sure that your seams are sitting nice and flat, and I can get my other casing ready and show you the next stage after that. So I don't think you have to watch me do all of this stitching. So I've gone ahead and finished sewing the full length, and I've also stitched one of the casings onto one end. The other casing here we can position in place, and it's shorter than the bag is wide, because we need to take a seam allowance here, plus we do need just a little gap between the two of them that we get there. So I'm going to place the lining right sides together with it, and I'm going to include that casing in this seam here. So we may want to just put something in to hold that, maybe a couple of pins or clips, just so that it doesn't move while we're stitching it. And we're just going to stitch all the way across that seam. When we do this end, because I've already stitched this one on, and that's for a reason, because when we stitch the lining to it here, we're actually going to leave a gap, maybe a 3-inch gap in the middle, so that we can turn the whole bag through that, and then that gets stitched down in some top stitching later. So I'll go ahead and do this one, and I'll do the other end as well, and leave a gap in it there. So it's just really a matter of stitching regular seam allowance all the way along, making sure that the casing's included. So I've stitched that end, and this end here I have stitched, but I've left a gap, not a very large gap, but I've nonetheless left a gap for turning. So I just want to press those seams now. We are going to be doing the side seams and things, but I find if I can just press it now, it helps later, because it remembers that it's been pressed, we hope. Rather than trying to do it when it's all joined up, because it's much harder to do it when it's all joined up. So this one here that's got the gap in it, we'll just have to keep an eye that that sits nicely. So I'm just pressing the outside of that first, and then we'll fold that in, and just make sure that this seam allowance of the gap is sitting in, so that it looks like it's stitched at this stage. It will get stitched a bit later. So now we want to have it inside out again, always turning bags inside out, and we're going to stitch the side seams. So we're just going to try and bring those casings together, and we want to match these seams here so that the patches all match on the side seams, and then we're just going to stitch all the way along from one end all the way to the other. But as I said, we need to match those seams as we go. So I have actually found it easier to start at this end, and I can match the seams as I go. The middle one needs matching. Great way to use up our leftovers. It's great little bag. I love bags. You might have guessed I like bags. They make good gifts on their own. They make great containers for things. They're excellent places to put delicious things. So I'll go ahead now and do exactly the same on the other side. I've done all that side. So I've done both the side seams now. Now we're going to turn it out through this hole here. So it doesn't need a huge hole. We haven't put any batting in this, but if you had batting in there, which you could do, you would need a slightly larger hole than I've left so that you could get it all through. So what we're wanting to do is push the outside of the bag out and get those corners out so that they're as sharp as we can reasonably get them. And then the lining of the bag actually just goes inside. We don't need to turn it right out, and just pop those corners right into those corners. It's looking good. And then we go back to the iron, and because we did that pressing earlier, it is going to be pretty good. It just needs to be reminded that it needs to sit flat along those seams so the casings are sticking out the top nicely. And this one where we've turned it, we just need to repress that because quite often it gets a little bit scrunched in the turning process. And then on these side bits here, we just need to press that down because that's a new little bit of seam that wasn't pressed before. There's only a small gap between the casings. It didn't need to be any more than that on a small bag like this. So I think that's all looking pretty good. So what we're going to do is top stitch around this edge here, just below the seam where the casings pop out. And as we do that, that will enclose the gap that we'd left for turning. So having turned it all that way, it's actually easier to sew it. Although if you've got a free arm, you could do it around the free arm. But I've got mine occupied at the moment. So I'm just going to stitch around about 1/8 of an inch below the seam, just to hold that edge and largely to hold that gap closed. So just make sure that it's sitting closed when you get to that. So that's looking pretty good. We've got our casings sitting up there. We've got our gap is closed on the inside. So now we just need some cord. So I've got a couple of pieces of cord here to thread in, and I like to do the two so that when you pull them from each end it just draws it in nicely like that. So they just really need to be a little bit longer than the bag is wide. And then I like to put the little ends on like I've done here, and that is simply a rectangle of fabric that I've folded up, and I've folded the pieces back down again so that it's a nice fold, and then they just need to be stitched. So it doesn't need to be as wide as this, but it's quite hard to handle something too narrow, so we're just going to bring it down to something like that, and it's really just a matter of some straight stitching, just short seams. So they're just like little pockets for the cord ends, really. And then I just like to trim the corners down near the seam, trim the seam, and then I do also just trim that top corner so that those little bits don't stick out the top, which they sometimes want to do. And make sure there's no threads hanging out the top edges here. And then we're going to turn that out the right way, and we'll have a little pocket in there to put the cord pieces in, and then we need to thread the cord through first though. Trusty turning pencil again. So there's other things you could do with the cord ends. You could just tie them in a knot, you could add beads, you can get little ends for cords, but I quite like to just do that with the fabric. So with the cord, I've just got a large safety pin here, and I'm going to pop one end of both pieces of cord onto the safety pin and thread them both in from one end along one side only, and then I'm going to take one of them off, because then one needs to go one way and one needs to go the other. So if I just take one off there, and then I can pull this one through. I don't pull it all the way through, you just got to leave a little bit sticking out the end, and we put this one through this way. And then we need to pop the other one back through from that end. And you just got to make sure you don't pull this one through at the same time. Sometimes they get caught up together, but no, it's behaving quite nicely. So we just need to pop these little ends of the cord into their little pockets that we made and stitch across them, and it's pretty close to being finished now. So we'll get this done. So I like to pop them in and I stitch across, and then I usually back up over the same line of stitching. That just gives it an extra line of stitching over the cord there. So we'll pop the other one on, and then we can have a look at the bag all finished. And another great way of using up some of our bits and pieces, including the colours from our fat quarters. Only a couple more projects to go. Getting close to the end now. Other than that, just trim off our little thread ends. And it's looking pretty good. How's that? So I think that's a great little bag. I don't know what you're going to store in it, but like I said, good for delicious things. I know that it would make a very nice chocolate bag. So in fact, 2 chocolate bags. Now how amazing would that be? But all sorts of things. It might be a little project on the go. It might be any number of things. So that was just another little idea for using some of our fat quarter fabrics and making something useful with it. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I will see you again with the next project, which will be project number 19.